It was a typical family gathering, a casual dinner at our place, everyone laughing, catching up, and enjoying good food. The kids were in the other room, watching a movie, and the adults were seated around the dining table, chatting. Greg, my husband, looked the same as always, quiet but content. He wasn't the life of the party, but he was always there, smiling, listening, and occasionally chiming in with a comment that made everyone laugh. Tonight, however, I noticed something different. He wasn't quite as relaxed as usual. The conversation, as always, shifted to work. Greg mentioned something about a new colleague, someone he had been working closely with. The man had just started at the company and was already making waves with his fresh ideas. Greg's voice faltered slightly as he spoke, and I noticed his fingers were toying with his glass, nervously tapping it. I didn't think much of it at first. Greg had always been a bit self-conscious about his thinning hair. He started losing it in his mid-30s, and although he never really acknowledged it much, I knew it bothered him. I had always told him it didn't matter, that he looked great no matter what. But that night, the mood at the table shifted, and before I realized what I was doing, the words left my mouth. "Well, at least you don't look like you're going bald like Greg here," I joked, pointing a playful finger at him. "Guess I'll have to start planning a wig fund if it gets any worse." Laughter erupted from the table. It wasn't a cruel joke, at least not to me. It was just a harmless comment, one I thought would get everyone laughing and lighten the mood. But I saw Greg's face go pale, the corners of his lips turning down slightly, his eyes flicking toward the floor. I instantly regretted the words, but it was too late. The damage was done. I quickly tried to backpedal. "Oh, come on, I'm just teasing. You know I love you no matter what," I said, giving him a playful nudge with my elbow. But Greg didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at his plate. The conversation moved on, but the weight of his silence hung in the air. It wasn't like Greg to get so quiet over something so trivial. I figured it would blow over, that he'd let it go as usual. But deep down, a little voice in my head told me I had crossed a line. Still, I brushed it off. He'd be fine, right? As the night went on, I tried to catch his eye a few times, but Greg wouldn't look at me. He was distant, his usual warmth replaced with a coldness I hadn't seen before. Later that evening, when the guests had left and the house was quiet, I went to find him. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to approach him. I found him sitting on the couch, staring out the window, his face unreadable. "Hey, you okay?" I asked softly, sitting next to him. He didn't turn to face me. "I'm fine," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. I could feel the tension in the room. I wanted to reach out, to apologize, but the words seemed stuck in my throat. "Greg, I didn't mean to hurt you." "It was just a joke," I said, my voice trembling a little. "You know I didn't mean it like that." He finally looked at me, his eyes dark and cold. "You think it was just a joke?" he said quietly, his voice strained. "It wasn't just a joke, Emma. It was the one thing I hate being reminded of, and you made it public, in front of everyone." I swallowed hard, feeling a tight knot form in my chest. I had never seen him this upset. I didn't think it would matter that much," I said, my voice faltering. "I thought you could laugh about it too, like you usually do." Greg stood up abruptly, pacing the room. "I don't laugh about it, Emma. You think I don't notice? Every day, I watch my hair thin out, and every day it eats at me. But I keep it to myself. And you, he stopped himself, taking a deep breath. "You just threw it in my face." I felt the sting of his words like a slap across the face. I had been so careless, so thoughtless. I wanted to apologize again, to make things right, but the words wouldn't come. I had never imagined that something so simple, so innocent to me, could have such a devastating effect on him. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Greg turned away, his back to me. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Emma," he said quietly. "I don't know if you even understand how much that hurt. But I don't know if I can forget it." The silence between us was deafening. I felt a mix of guilt and confusion, unsure of what to say or how to fix what I had broken. I knew I had made a mistake, but I had no idea how deep it went. I tried to reach out to him, but he pulled away, retreating into himself. He didn't want to talk anymore, and neither of us knew where to go from there. The night ended with no resolution, just a heavy silence that hung in the air like a dark cloud. As I lay in bed, I replayed the moment over and over in my mind, trying to understand what I had done wrong. I had never meant to hurt him. I didn't even realize how much my words would cut. But now, it felt like I had broken something inside him, something that might not heal so easily. And as I closed my eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a mistake that would change everything between us. The days following the dinner felt strange, like I was walking on eggshells. Greg didn't snap at me, didn't yell or lash out, but there was a coldness to him that I couldn't ignore. He had always been the type to bottle things up, to internalize his feelings, and I knew that meant I would have to wait for him to come around. But the waiting was unbearable. Every time I tried to speak to him, it felt like I was talking to a stranger, not the man I had married. It started with little things. He didn't kiss me goodbye in the mornings anymore, just a curt nod as he grabbed his coat and left. When he returned in the evening, he was distant, his focus always on something else, his phone, the TV, or even his work. I kept telling myself that he'd snap out of it, that this was just a rough patch, but deep down I knew that something was wrong, something more than just a joke gone awry. I tried everything. I made his favorite dinner one night, hoping that maybe a quiet meal at home would help break the tension. But he barely touched his food, his fork clinking against the plate as he pushed it around. We ate in silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was invisible to him. "Greg," I said, trying to make eye contact. "We need to talk about what happened the other night." He looked up briefly, his eyes meeting mine, but then quickly glanced away. "I don't think there's anything left to say." His words hit me harder than I expected. It was like he had already made up his mind, like the wall between us was solidifying with each passing moment. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I fought it back. "You can't just ignore this, Greg. We have to talk about it. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not." He sighed, a long, weary sound, and rubbed his temples. "It's not about pretending. It's about what you said, Emma. About what you did." I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him that it wasn't such a big deal, that it was just a joke, but the words caught in my throat. I had said it was just a joke, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Not for him. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "I've been trying to let it go, but every time I see you, every time you try to act like everything's okay, it hurts. It's like you don't even get it." I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm, to not let the panic and guilt consume me. "I'm sorry, Greg. I never meant to hurt you. You know that, right?" He didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the wall ahead. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and tight. "I know you didn't mean to. But it doesn't change how it feels." The words stung, more than I expected. I had been so sure that an apology would make everything better. But I was wrong. I was starting to realize just how much damage I had done. Greg stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back. "I need some space," he said, his voice rough. "I just need some time to think." I watched him leave the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. The door to our bedroom slammed shut, and I was left in the quiet, heavy silence of the house. The guilt that had been simmering in me since that night began to boil over. What had I done? Why hadn't I seen how much it had been affecting him? I thought about the countless times Greg had made light of his hair loss, how he had downplayed it in front of me and others. How he had tried to laugh it off, never letting on how much it hurt. I had always told him it didn't matter, that he didn't need to worry about it. But now, I could see it clearly, he had been carrying that weight alone, and I had only added to it. I tried to sleep that night, but my mind wouldn't stop. I kept replaying the dinner in my head, hearing my words echo in my ears. I had never intended for them to cut so deeply, but now I understood the damage they had caused. And as the hours dragged on, I realized that I couldn't fix it with just an apology. Greg's pain ran deeper than I had thought, and it wasn't something I could just erase with a few words. The next day, I woke up early, determined to make things right. I knew I couldn't keep pushing him or pretending that everything was fine. Greg needed to know that I truly understood how much I had hurt him, that I wasn't just brushing it off. I found him in the kitchen, staring blankly at his coffee cup. He didn't notice me at first, and I took the opportunity to just watch him. He looked exhausted, the weight of something heavy bearing down on him. It was a look I hadn't seen in years, one of quiet resignation, as if he had given up on something without even realizing it. "Greg," I said softly, my voice trembling slightly. "Can we talk?" He turned slowly, his eyes meeting mine, but there was no warmth in them. Just that same coldness I had been seeing for days. "I'm sorry," I said, my words coming out in a rush. "I was wrong, Greg. I didn't realize how much my words would hurt you. I was thoughtless, and I should have been more considerate. I'm sorry for making you feel that way. For making you feel small. That's the last thing I ever wanted." Greg didn't speak at first, just stood there, his face unreadable. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fists were clenched at his sides. He wasn't ready to forgive me, and I knew that. But I had to try. "I don't know how to make it up to you," I said, my voice cracking. "But I want to. I want to fix this. I don't want to lose you over something so stupid." There was a long pause, and I wondered if he would even say anything, if he would just walk away and leave it all behind. But then, finally, he spoke, his voice soft but firm. "I don't know if I can just let this go, Emma," he said, his eyes dark with hurt. "It's not just about the joke. It's about how you didn't see me, how you didn't understand how much it really meant to me." His words cut deeper than I expected, and I felt the guilt rise up again, thick and suffocating. I had failed him. And now, I didn't know how to fix it. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. Greg's words haunted me, replaying over and over in my mind, and no matter how hard I tried to make things right, it felt like the distance between us only grew wider. He wasn't cruel or harsh, but he had become a ghost in our own home, drifting around me like a shadow, never truly present. And no matter how many times I tried to apologize or explain myself, he remained closed off. I had hurt him in a way that I couldn't undo, and that realization was suffocating. The house felt cold, too quiet. The hum of normal life was gone, replaced by a tension I couldn't escape. Every conversation we had seemed strained, as if we were speaking different languages. I wanted to fix things, but it was like trying to stitch together a broken vase with fingers too numb to feel the cracks. One evening, after dinner, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space across from me where Greg usually sat. The silence was overwhelming. I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to do something, anything, to show him I was truly sorry. I had to find a way to reach him, to remind him of who we used to be before everything fell apart. I decided to give him space, which felt impossible. The idea that he needed time to think was hard for me to accept, but I couldn't keep pushing him. I knew he wouldn't respond to pressure, and if I wanted to prove to him that I understood the gravity of my mistake, I had to respect his distance. Still, every minute without him felt like a weight pressing down on me. I started leaving little notes for him, nothing too grand, just simple messages. "I'm sorry," they said. "I love you." I slipped them into his jacket pockets, left them by his keys, or tucked them under his pillow when he wasn't looking. At first, he didn't mention them. He didn't even acknowledge them, and it tore me up inside. But I kept doing it, hoping that somewhere in the quiet of his mind, my words might begin to reach him. The next week, I tried something different. I decided to plan something special, something we could do together, something that might help us reconnect. I remembered how much Greg loved our old weekend hikes, how we used to get lost in the woods, talking about everything and nothing at all. It had always been one of our favorite pastimes, and I thought that maybe, just maybe, it could remind him of the good parts of us. I woke up early that Saturday, determined to make things work. I prepared a simple breakfast, pancakes, bacon, fresh fruit, and left it on the table with a note, "Let's go for a hike today. Just the two of us. Please." I waited, my stomach in knots, praying that he would say yes. But when he came downstairs, his eyes didn't meet mine. He grabbed a coffee from the counter and sat down, staring at the floor. "Greg," I said, my voice trembling. "Can we please talk? I really want to make this work." He looked up at me then, and for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something that wasn't anger or indifference. It was exhaustion. "Emma, I don't know anymore." I felt my heart sink, but I couldn't give up now. "Please, just give me one chance," I begged. "Let's go hiking, like we used to. It doesn't have to be perfect. We don't have to fix everything today, but I want to try." He didn't respond right away. He just sat there, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. For a long moment, I thought he was going to turn me down, that he was too tired, too hurt to even try. But then, slowly, he stood up. "Fine," he said quietly. "We'll go. But I'm not making any promises." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, even if it wasn't the answer I had hoped for. It was a start. The drive to the trailhead was mostly silent. I kept glancing at him, hoping for a sign, any sign, that he was starting to soften, but he kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The tension between us was thick, like something unspoken hung in the air. But I refused to let it stop me. I knew this was our chance to try and rebuild something, even if it was fragile. When we reached the trail, I grabbed the backpack I had packed with water and snacks. The crisp autumn air felt refreshing, but it couldn't shake the heaviness that lingered. We started walking, side by side, neither of us speaking at first. The crunch of the leaves beneath our boots was the only sound, and the silence between us stretched on. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Greg broke the quiet. "I don't know if I can forget what you said," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "It hurt more than I can explain." I stopped walking, turning to face him. The pain in his voice was like a slap, and I felt the tears rise in my throat, threatening to spill over. "I know, Greg," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know I hurt you. And I can't take back what I said. I can't undo it, but I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. You're everything to me. You always have been." Greg didn't look at me right away. He stood there for a long moment, his gaze distant, like he was weighing my words against the hurt he had been carrying. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I want to believe you, Emma. I really do. But it's not just about the joke. It's about everything. The way I felt invisible, like you don't really see me. And I know it's not intentional, but it's how I feel." The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave. I hadn't just hurt his pride with a joke. I had made him feel small, unimportant. I had made him feel like he wasn't enough. And now, I understood the depth of it. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my heart breaking. "I never meant to make you feel that way. You're the most important person in my life. You've always been. And I see you, Greg. I see you more than you'll ever know." He didn't respond right away, but his shoulders seemed to relax a little. The wall between us wasn't completely gone, but in that moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we were starting to rebuild the bridge that had been burned. The silence didn't feel quite as suffocating now. It felt like the first step towards something new. Something fragile, but real. The days after our hike felt like a delicate truce. Greg and I didn't speak much about what had happened, but there was a subtle shift in the air between us, a quiet understanding that things weren't entirely fixed, but we were working on it. Each small step forward felt monumental. He wasn't as distant, not as withdrawn, but there were still moments where I could see the weight of what had happened in his eyes, the unsaid words hanging just out of reach. I couldn't undo the hurt I had caused him, and I knew I would never be able to take back what I had said. But I also knew that I couldn't let this destroy us. Greg was still my husband, the man I had promised to love and care for, and I had made a terrible mistake by dismissing his feelings. Now, it was up to me to show him that I understood the consequences of my actions. It wouldn't be enough to apologize once. I had to prove that I was committed to making things right, no matter how long it took. One evening, as we sat in the living room together, I finally worked up the courage to speak again. "Greg," I started, my voice shaky. "I know we've both been quiet these past few days, but I don't want us to pretend like everything's okay when it's not. I hurt you, and I need you to know that I'm sorry. I want to be better for you. I want to be the wife you deserve." Greg looked at me then, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, I saw a flicker of something warm in his eyes. His expression softened, just a little, and he leaned back in his chair. "I know you're sorry," he said, his voice low. "But it's not just about the words you said. It's about how you saw me. How you treated me like I was nothing more than a joke." The guilt that had been gnawing at me for days surged up again, and I swallowed hard. "I never meant to make you feel that way," I whispered. "I never wanted to make you feel less than. You're everything to me, Greg. I don't want to make the same mistake again. Please, believe me." He didn't respond right away. He just sat there, looking at me, as if he was trying to gauge if my words were genuine. The silence between us felt suffocating, but I didn't look away. I had to let him see how much I cared, how much I was willing to fight for us. After what felt like an eternity, Greg finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. "I need time, Emma. I'm not ready to forgive you just yet. But I'm willing to try." That was all I needed to hear. It wasn't the "I forgive you" I had hoped for, but it was a start. A fragile, hesitant start, but a start nonetheless. For the next few weeks, we took things slow. We didn't rush into anything, didn't try to fix everything overnight. Instead, we focused on rebuilding the trust that had been shattered, piece by piece. Greg and I talked more than we had in months, sharing our thoughts and feelings in a way we hadn't done in a long time. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments when the tension flared up, but we were making progress. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, I felt a shift within myself. For the first time since everything had gone wrong, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. I didn't feel like I was constantly trying to fix something. Instead, I felt calm. Like we were finally moving in the right direction, even if it was a slow and steady crawl. "I know I can't undo what I did," I said softly, my hand resting on his. "But I want to keep showing you that I'm here. That I see you. That I'm not going anywhere." Greg squeezed my hand, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it meant everything to me. "I know," he said. "And I'm willing to give you that chance. I just need you to keep showing me, Emma. Words aren't enough anymore." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep inside me. "I will. I promise. I'm not going to give up on us." And for the first time in weeks, I truly believed that. As the days passed, we continued to move forward, step by step. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments where the hurt from my careless words lingered in the air, but we were no longer stuck in that place of pain. We were finding our way back to each other, slowly but surely. It wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect it to be. Relationships take work, and healing takes time. But I had learned an invaluable lesson through all of this: words are powerful, and they can either build or destroy. I had to be more careful with how I spoke, more mindful of the impact my words could have. Greg wasn't just my husband, he was a person with feelings, with his own insecurities and struggles. And I had to respect that. It wasn't easy, but we were learning how to communicate better, how to listen and understand each other in a way that we hadn't before. And as I sat next to him that night, watching the flickering light from the TV dance across his face, I felt a quiet sense of peace settle over me. We weren't where we once were, but we were on our way there, together. It had taken a painful mistake, but it had also opened my eyes to the deeper work that needed to be done. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape the future. And with Greg by my side, I was willing to do whatever it took to make sure we didn't lose each other. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes, the hardest lessons bring the greatest growth. And as long as we were willing to keep trying, there was hope for us yet.